coming, and I suggested that all of you, and I'm sure most of you did, or probably all of you are pretty much aware of the editorials that have taken place this spring. A couple of things are really significant. One, I just have to say that Wayne Green is one of the smartest persons I've ever met in my life, and I say that totally. I said that when I was at TPS, I say that now. And I say it in the context of not only do I admire his innate capabilities, but he makes his own mind up, and he is on the issue, not on some kind of partisan politics that causes him to decide one way or the other which way he is going. If he respects you, you earn it. That's all there is to it. And I say all that with, I think he's one of the greatest supporters of public schools, a product of public schools. But I am so glad that he is in the position that he is. And I'm one that have been editorialized about before, but that's okay. That goes with the territory. There was never anything unfair ever said. You're going to get tough scrutiny, and that's the way it goes. And all you can ever ask for is fairness. And not only does Wayne have a lot of ability, but he's also very fair. And he's just the most interesting person to speak to. He expects interaction, and he will tell you that. He can tell you whatever he wants to tell you, but he enjoys interaction, and he's pretty good at back and forth. So we are really pleased that you would take an hour to an hour and a half. We'll finish for sure by 2:30, maybe by 2. I don't know what your schedule is today. But we're going to turn it over to my friend Wayne Green, and we're going to let him have it. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. I always love chatting with Keith's classes because I've always admired Keith for years, but also because he just attracts the smartest students that I deal with. I speak to a lot of classes, but the people in this class are civically engaged, and they always ask interesting, difficult questions. So I hope you'll feel free to do that. I thought I'd share with you some observations I've made over the years. As I'm saying, this is a class in public relations and schools.
Yes.
Right. I thought I'd share with you some observations I've made over the years about effective public relations strategies for public schools and other organizations that I've covered closely, and some other strategies that were not successful, and maybe talk about why. And also try to give you some insights from an insider, a media insider, that people who are trying to, I use the word manipulate it advisedly, but you're trying to manipulate the media, trying to get their story told their way, which is fair enough. It's what you want to do. That might help you understand. Some of them are very modest, almost funny tips, although I'm telling them to you for a reason. And some of them are fairly important. When I have here 15 points, if I don't make it through all 15 in an hour, I call that successful. The first thing I've told a lot of groups over the years is that you need to know the media captains, the decision makers in your community before you have to know them. By that I mean you want to know the person who's going to be pulling the trigger on that very important story concerning your career or your what you're trying to accomplish in the school district before it's at a crisis point. So when you're in a new position, you're superintendent, associate superintendent, something like that, you need to find out who the decision makers are in your local media, And I think that's, the first place you want to look is at the local newspaper. And sometimes that person has the title of executive editor, sometimes they have the title of editor, sometimes it's managing editor. At the Tulsa World, and sometimes over the courses of years, in one newspaper that title might shift from one person to another. And there's no reason that you have to limit yourself to just one person within the organization. But right now, if you were trying to find, if you want to be a smart school leader, the person you want to get to know is the managing editor of the Tulsa World. His name is Mike Strain. And I apologize for not having his telephone number. I should have that, but his email address is mike.strain@tulsaworld.com. Mike runs the day-to-day operations.
Go ahead, Wayne, I just need to get something that
Sure.
just continue.
He runs the day-to-day operations of our newspaper. If you wanted to ask somebody to assign a particular story, Mike's the one who can make that story happen for you. If you wanted to make sure that your side of the story were told in a particular story, Mike's the guy who can make that happen. Now, you'd also be wise to know the foot soldiers, the people who are actually covering your board meetings, the ones out talking to your principals and teachers. Currently at the Tulsa World, that would be two people. Andrea Eager, who's as good a public school reporter as I've ever dealt with, and a younger reporter by the name of Ariana Picard, who's also very, very talented. Assuming that you're in a superintendent's position, you're going to meet that person, on day one. They're going to be in the room when you get hired, because the reporter who's covering your district is going to be at the school board meeting, obviously. You want to have a collegial relationship with that person and understand that sometimes they're going to write things that you dislike. They're going to talk to people who disagree with the choices. That's their job. The job is to get things accurate, obviously. So you shouldn't hesitate to tell them when you think they've gotten something wrong in professional sort of fashion. They're grown-ups, so they can handle a fair criticism. The reason I say you need to get to know the person in this leadership position before you have to, I hope there's an obvious reason to that. You want to have built up a relationship with the person who makes the critical choices before you're asking them to do something that they may or may not want to do. There's the day, maybe it's not true. Well, let's say it was the day after Keith Ballard was hired as the superintendent of public schools. He called me just to introduce himself, and I believe that was the first time I heard him use the phrase that he was hell-bent to make sure that there was a qualified teacher in every room in Tulsa Public Schools and a qualified leader in every building. And I got to know that phrase pretty well because every time I saw him after that, he would say it again. So two things there. He'd introduced himself, so I knew who I was dealing with. I was at that point an editorial page editor in waiting. I was editorial writer for the Tulsa World. My position was pretty well. My path had been defined at that point. And so he had just broken the ice. He'd introduced himself in a telephone conversation, maybe lasted 15 minutes. But more importantly, he had made the opening bid in making sure I understood what it was he was about as a superintendent. And we had a very tumultuous relationship with his predecessor, who I may later on in this discussion discuss some of his foibles in terms of dealing with the media. But if you wanted an exemplar for how to do it right, you would follow how Keith did it in his years. The next tip is sort of it's almost funny in ways, but people don't understand how the media works. And so I did just give you a little insight knowledge. There are what I think of as cycles in newspapers, in also true of television stations and radio stations, and there are they work on different wavelengths. I guess I'm abusing my physics vocabulary there, but we'll go with it. There's a daily cycle, which is that we produce a newspaper every day, and we have what we call a deadline. I mean, the public is familiar with the word deadline, which is misunderstood. I think in the newspaper business, we think of the word deadline as when they turn the press on and they can't turn it back off again, which would be roughly around, for the Tulsa World, 2:30 in the morning. So up to that point, anything hypothetically could be changed. But in reality, that's not a practical, a good practical idea to have in mind. The individual pages have individual plates on the press, and they have to make those plates at different. They can't make them all at the same moment. So the plate that they make for the front page, they to turn that press on at 2:30 in the morning, they might make at 2. But the plate for page B7, they might be making at 10 o'clock at night. So depending on where the story is placed, and typically the most important story is closest to the front, the plate deadline could be anywhere in a multiple hour range. Now, realistically, if you don't want to piss people off, reporters are a lot like bankers. They like to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So they like to be wrapping up their work about 4:45. They, of course, do not always get to do that. But if you're calling them at 4:30 with a story that they have within their power to say, we'll look at that one tomorrow, that's the answer you're going to get. So you want to get adjusted to the hours that the people you're working with are working, which, in realistic Tulsa World fashion, that would be, they normally walk into the newsroom at the crack of 10, and they're take about an hour and a half for lunch somewhere in the middle of the day, and are thinking about going home about 4:45. Now, there's also a weekly schedule, a weekly cycle is working on top of that. The weekly cycle is that reporters come to work on Monday morning and they're hungover. They don't have very many ideas for what they're going to do the rest of that week. I'm not talking about Ariana or Andrea here, of course, or myself. These are those other reporters. That they start, a couple of cups of coffee, and they're starting to get rolling. By Wednesday, they honestly need to be thinking about some sort of product for the weekend paper, for the Sunday paper. Their boss is going to want to know what are you going to publish in Sunday's paper. By Friday afternoon, they've got blinders on. They're not looking for new ideas, new input on things. They're looking to wrap things up. So, if you're looking to press, if you have an optional story about a great teacher who you'd like to let the public know about, who's done a terrific job in some project that's very important to you to get publicity for, Friday afternoon at 4 is not the right time to make that pitch. Monday at 11 might be an ideal time to make that pitch. Anytime before Wednesday is going to be a better time if you were trying to get into the Sunday paper. There's also an annual cycle that this is particularly interesting, I think, that no one ever seems to grasp a hold of. But for the newspaper, the most limiting factor that we have in the newspaper business is space. We have fewer people than we used to have, but we have enough people. We have less money to spend on gadgets and travel than we used to have, but we have enough money for those things. But we really don't have enough of on a routine basis. It's just space in the paper. And if you're trying to get some of that space in the paper, it's smart to understand when the competition is fiercest and when it's slackest. The truth of the matter is that between the first week in February and the last week in May, the legislature is in session, and they can absolutely take over the newspaper. The competition is much fiercer for that space when the legislature is in session. May 28th, 29th every year, the gavel comes down, the legislature goes home, and the newspaper's tachometer goes from 30,000 RPM to 5 because the addictive drug down on the other end of the turnpike is suddenly gone. From also the slack period in public schools, I understand, but from end of May till frankly till Labor Day, when the school is out, and the legislature is also out of session, especially in odd-numbered years when there aren't elections going on, reporters are having to rely on their own creativity to fill that space. If you are spurring their creativity by telling them about a summer arts program that you're running at your school, or what you've done to try to get more kids to show up at your free lunch program, or the tutoring program you have to help second graders make a successful transition into third grade and do a better job on those god-awful state-mandated tests. Your chances with that pitch on June 1st are so much better than your chances on May 1st that it's hard to describe. There's also, within that annual calendar, some special days that are that I think everyone who's trying to manipulate the media should circle on their calendar every January 1st. On November 12th this year, I guarantee the Tulsa World will have a story about the Veterans Parade. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is because the Veterans Parade literally encircles our building so that we can't leave the Tulsa World building because there's veterans circling us along all four sides. But more importantly, it's the only thing going on in Tulsa on November the 11th. The City Hall closes, the legislature is not in session, the state government offices are closed, the courthouse not going on. And guess what? We get to write one story about that parade because no one wants to read the second. Most people don't read the first one, but no one's going to read the second story about the parade. However, the newspaper on November 12th is the same size as the newspaper on November the 13th, when the state government's open again, the courthouse is open again, the police are actually arresting people, and there's news going on. So the competition to get into the November 12th paper is enormously lower than the competition to get into the November 13th paper. So I've always wondered that more people don't roll out their programs that they're trying to get ink on in press conferences at noon on November the 11th. Or, if you had some, if you wanted to get a reporter to write a story about some program that they could come take a picture of, for goodness sake, if you could pitch that on November 5th and say, hey, I know you're going to have trouble on Friday, on Veterans Day. I know things are going to be going on. Here's an idea that you might find intriguing. I know when I was a reporter, if anyone had given me that opportunity, I would have snapped at it. The other better known day of the year that, I'm sorry, this is also July 5th is the same thing, same scenario. Everything's closed on July 4th. Plus, there's nothing going on in July anyway. There's a great opportunity for manipulation to go on that day. And again, I'm using the word advisedly. The most famous day in this fashion is always the day after Thanksgiving, right? Biggest newspaper of the year, every year. Every retailer in town wants to have their advertisement in the newspaper the day after Thanksgiving because it's the biggest retail day of the year. However, all the government agencies are closed on Thanksgiving and on the day after Thanksgiving. There's nothing to write about. I can guarantee you, we'll go write a story about the firefighters eating Thanksgiving dinner at the fire station and being sad because they're not with their families, because that's about the most creative story that reporters can come up with on their own. If you can come up with a better story and pitch that to Mike Strain or to Andrea Eager, your chances of success are much, much better than they would be 1 week earlier or 1 week later. The third point is self-interested, but I think it's valid to you too. I mean, I think I can justify it to you. I always tell people that you want to put your print media first. If you're in a position where you're dealing with broadcasters and print, you always want to deal with the print people first. And here's the reason why. There's 3 reasons. Newspapers are read by people who have a little bit of extra money. You have to pay to read the newspaper, unlike television, which is just thrown at us over the free broadcast airways. It is read by decision makers and taxpayers. But those are the 2 big buckets of people who read newspapers. We used to deliver newspapers to legislators' doorstep down at the state capitol when the legislature was in session. When we quit having home delivery in Oklahoma City, we stopped doing that. They still do it. I'm telling you, when I talked to Leslie Osborne, a legislator who lives in, I forget if it's Mustang or El Reno, but anyway, the other side of Oklahoma City, she reads every word in Tulsa World every day because she's a smart legislator. She's also, of course, reading the Oklahoman and whatever the newspaper in Mustang is too. And one of the reasons she's reading the Tulsa World is because she knows that George Kaiser is reading the Tulsa World, and Ken Levitt, and found all of the funders forums, the big money people, the mayor, people like that, they're reading every word of it. And the reason they're reading it, and Jim Inhofe used to, he doesn't say this anymore, but he used to say that he didn't read the Tulsa World. Well, the truth was he had someone read it to him if he wasn't reading it, because he could usually quote it to me when I was talking to him. Other reasons why you want to think about print first is that newspapers, even though I mentioned there's that space limitation within newspapers, we still have the freedom to deal with details that just aren't there in a broadcast format. In a 45-second television piece, which would be a nice, long TV piece, you just cannot tell as much as you can tell in a well-written, disciplined 20-inch newspaper article. And this one is the peculiar bit of logic, but it's absolutely true. There's one newspaper, right, and there's 4 TV stations in our market, and 3 or 4 radio stations that care about news. Giving important stories to the newspaper first is fair, because you're not showing any sort of bias towards Channel 2 or Channel 6 or Channel 8. They're all getting at the same moment when they pick up their paper at 6 o'clock in the morning. And believe me, they do read the newspaper every morning, and they have someone whose title is assignment editor, whose first job every day is to tear the newspaper apart and hand them out to reporters. You do this one, you do this one, you do this one. They're constantly following our work. I want to offer you a couple of thoughts about public information officers. If some of you may be public information officers, or you may be in a position where you have someone working for you who's a public information officer. I've dealt with public information officers or people, vice presidents for external affairs. There's a lot of different names of people. Associate superintendent for whatever. There's a lot of different titles for these people. But let's think of them all as public information officers. I've dealt with a lot of them over the years, and I have some observations. Some reporters resent having to deal with public information officers. I don't, especially a well-qualified, hard-working, well-informed public information officer. I think that someone who sees their job as facilitating information instead of preventing information, which there are unfortunately people out there who think of the job that way. But facilitators, they can be a great advantage to a good reporter. Here are some of the things that distinguish a successful public information officer. First, they need to be within the senior policy circle of your organization. Typically, in successful operations, the public information officer has an office next to the chief executive officer. David Boren, when he steps out of his office, is the press secretary's office, next office to his left. And nobody handles the media any better than David Boren does. David Boren's first public information officer, remember, is David Boren. But the second one is the guy in the office immediately to his left. Drew Diamond, who was not in the end a terribly successful police chief in Tulsa, but was remarkably successful in working with the media. The public information officer was right down the hall from him. A good public information officer needs to be in your cabinet. They need to be sitting there, hearing the discussion, knowing what the debate is, knowing both sides of the story, knowing even the stuff you don't want to get out, because they need to be able to explain it. They need to understand it, even if they're not going to tell it all. And a good reporter can very quickly figure out, you know, the third or fourth time that you ask your question and the answer is, oh, no, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that. And it's, you know, you ask a question about policy, about something that you know, you're actually asking the question you wanted the superintendent to answer, but could get to the superintendent, and that the superintendent should know the answer. But if the public information officer doesn't know that honestly doesn't know the answer to that question, then why should they ever deal with the public information officer again? They need to be an inside player. I have one observation that I feel so strongly about that I've given it the name of Green's rule, which is that organizations very quickly will reflect the top leader's attitude towards media and towards transparency. And I mean very quickly, overnight. I've seen organizations overnight change from opaque to transparent, and from transparent to opaque, with the same personnel, except for the guy at the top. But if the guy at the top makes it clear that that open, honest, transparent communications are in the interest of the organization and are going to be the policy of the organization, then the people below him will either move on or will put that into operation overnight. The opposite is true when you go from someone, when you replace somebody who believes in transparency with somebody who is uncomfortable with the public knowing what's going on inside an operation. Or, as you know, it sometimes happens, someone who believes in transparency, who feels burned in some fashion by something that happens, and just decides to turn off the spigot. I don't know about other. I don't know a lot about management, but I'm telling you, in terms of the way your organization works with the media, the attitude of the top officer is very, very quickly transmitted down the line. There's a corollary to this, which is that the media will reflect that attitude right back at you. If you give them transparency, they will give you cooperation. If you give them opacity, they will give you hell. And there's psychology involved in that. It's not completely out of maliciousness or anger, and there's also some pretty good logic behind that too, which is that if this guy doesn't want me to know what's going on in his organization, then there must be something going on in his organization.
The other add something. I don't hate to interrupt. The nature. I've had more experience than anybody in this room in dealing with. Now, Wayne's had as much or more experience as I have in the area. I've had more experience than anybody in dealing with them, and I found out a couple of things. One, the nature of a reporter, they don't go into it if they don't think like this, is to get to the bottom of the story, is to find out the truth. And they're going to do it every time. And I have seen people who have thrown up every roadblock possible, but you're dealing with clever people who come out of these colleges of journalism, and they are to be taken seriously. They will get to the bottom of it. And I decided, it's my nature anyway, I decided a long time ago, I'm going to cooperate with them, and I'm going to give them everything. I'm not going to keep anything, and that really works a lot better for you, because the second point that I will make, I've run across very few public servants working in the journalism field, very few, if any, who don't ultimately treat you fairly. I'm not saying I've always agreed with everything, and there have been a time or two that I didn't like, but whenever I say a time or two, I mean a time or two. And that's it. And so this point that Wayne Green is making to you right now, you really need to listen. So thank you for allowing me to interject that.
Jerry Massey, who used to be the public information officer for the Corrections Department, was there probably 30 years in that position. I know it was longer than that. He was in that position when I was a little boy, and just recently retired. Used to joke, and through, he was public information officer through 7 or 8 corrections directors, who several of them were just flat fired. But he survived all that. He did very well professionally. He joked to me once that he had 50,000 assistant public information officers. There were guys in jeans and blue shirts and numbers on their because if he didn't tell me what was going on, one of them would walk over to a payphone and make a very expensive collect call to tell me what was going on at the facility. Because of what I do for a living, transparency is very important to me, and I urge you to make it very important to you too. It's the law. If you read in this class, you may read the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. They're very long and legalistic, but the very first sentence in the Open Records Act is that open meetings are the public policy of the state of Oklahoma. It's very straightforward. It's not the rest of it is nuanced. But from there on, the Constitution of the state says that all power rests in the people, and the Open Records Act says that the ability of the people to know what the government that they have instituted is doing is reliant on transparency. It's also the right way to operate. You'll feel better. You'll get along with your employees better. Your blood pressure will go down. You'll have better Lipitor. You don't have to use so much Lipitor. Your cholesterol numbers will be better. Your wife will love you more. And because it's the secret sauce to media happiness. If you want to get along with the people who are writing newspaper stories and editorials, if you want to get to that point, the first thing you do is institute a policy of openness. I have a couple of thoughts I'd like to offer you about how to deal with very, very bad situations. Where your girls' softball coach is taken out of the building in handcuffs, or I'm not thinking of any particular situations, or where you're having to announce a dread disease, communicable disease is shown up in your second grade population, or something along those lines. We'll just think of it as your worst day. Or perhaps, and this is even harder, in some ways, a worse situation, where you have to make a very difficult administrative choice, controversial administrative choice. I'm not referencing any particular situation, but perhaps you have to announce that we're going to combine these two schools, which people at neither school is going to an idea that neither school is going to warm up to. The first thing I would offer to you is that there's nothing wrong with, in fact, I think it's wise to embrace the public's ambiguity about these issues. And I think a lot of leaders aren't good at that. Once they've gone through the process and made up their mind about how things are going to be, that was actually, whether it's right or wrong, they're right in their minds, and they're not willing to recognize that you know, at one point, it was a 49-51 call for them, which, in a sense, cuts you off from the people who are still on that 49% of the balance. I think it's effective public psychology, and also just more honest. If you say, it's the hard decision, and there's a lot of reasons why we could have gone the other way. And we understand that the people at Waynewood Elementary are not happy that we're having to close their school. It's a terribly difficult choice for us to make, but here's why we did it. There's nothing. It's not just that there's nothing wrong with it. I think it helps bring people along, and you might not get them to flip from being the 49 to being the 51, but you might get them more realistically. You could get them to say, well, I disagree with them, but I feel like my perspective was considered, and I can live with it, or I'm going to have to live with it, instead of the people who are at the podium at your school board meeting screaming 4 minutes into their 3-minute allotment with 150 more people signed up to speak behind them. It's just good management of the public's feelings. Another point that type A personalities don't always naturally, it doesn't come to them naturally, is that you don't get to win every game. The New York Yankees are going to win the American League East this year with the help of God, and they'll do it winning somewhere around 90 baseball games and losing somewhere around 40 baseball games. That would be an outstanding season, especially where they are right now. But they're going to lose 40. You know, the guy who bats .333, who would be an all-star at this moment, that means he doesn't get a hit 2/3 of the time. Successful school superintendent has a better batting average than .333, but sometimes you're going to lose, and the school board will vote the other way, or they'll vote one way on Tuesday and then get a bunch of phone calls, and the next Tuesday they'll vote the other way, or the union just won't go along with the offer. The way you deal with those reversals reveals character, and it can be an enormous plus in the public's perception of you as a leader. It can also be a tremendous minus. If you come off as pouty, angry, obstreperous, then the public is going to they may remember the attitude more than they remember the issue. On the other hand, if you come off as we thought we were going to do it one way, the policymakers have changed, have shown us a better way, or want to go a different direction. We're gonna try our best to do it that way too. You can easily turn that into a neutral response to you as a leader, even if it's not the right policy. You can also turn that into a positive if it's handled correctly. And this next point is related to that. I think everyone who's going to be in an exposed public media position should practice for their worst day in as much detail as you can. And that might be just thinking it through, or it might be putting on your going to court suit and standing in front of the mirror and actually pretending to be talking to the TV cameras. You don't want to be making it up as you go along when you're dealing with the day that the balloon goes up. That's also one of those reasons you want to have got to know your media captains before the day that you have to know them. Here's a tip related to this that I think I learned by observing Keith Ballard. And that is, when you're in a position where you're answering media questions about difficult situations, always have something to say, even if it's not responsive to the question that you're being asked, and even if your lawyer is telling you not to say anything. Now, in general, you should listen to what your lawyer says. But if he tells you not to make any comment on the situation, he's giving you very bad PR advice. It is far better to answer the question that you wish that they had asked than to not answer the question at all. And some people are very, very good at that process, and some people are transparently bad about it. And the only thing I can think is that that's a matter of practice and experience. But David Boren is the master at it. If you ask him a question, he will give you an answer that makes you think. You ask him a difficult question, he'll give you an answer that makes you think while he's giving it to you that he's told you you know the answer to that question, and then you get back to the office and look at your notes, and you realize that you keep looking in the notes before you got to the answer, because he spoke for 15 minutes, but you never actually said what you're going to do about that one. And even experienced newsmen can fall for that. It's not necessarily deceitful. You'll get asked questions that you honestly just shouldn't answer, right? You can't say things that would lose you court cases, that would reveal personnel records that you're not allowed to reveal, that would violate students' Buckley Amendment rights, right? And we don't care about Buckley Amendment rights. We don't get in any trouble if we ask what was his grade in Professor Ballard's PR class. You can't answer that question, right? The law says you can't. But if we find out the answer, we can certainly publish it. There's no limitation on us. So the secret is to have a response to every question, even if it's not the response to the question. The other, another related tip here, when you're in that awful situation, and you're going to have to answer for it in a public setting, you want to take your medicine. You want to take all of it, and you want to do it one time. So don't hold back some element of it, thinking, well, they don't know about this yet, because they're going to find out about it the next day. You're not quite the corrections department, but if you're working in public schools, if you're working in Tulsa Public Schools, you've got about 10,000 assistant public information officers out there: students, teachers, faculty, assistant superintendents. And if they think you're not telling the whole story, but we're telling the part of the story that has got them pissed off, then the phone will ring tomorrow, and guess what? the front page story today becomes the front page story tomorrow too. You see people mishandle this all the time, who had an opportunity to deal with an awful situation in one take, and they managed to spread it out into 2, 3, 4 days. That's, think about what that does in public perception. It's, the public perceives that as, he's been, he's hiding something, right? There's this chase mentality. It's coming out over time, but he's still trying to cover it up. That's not the perception you want.
Let's look at some more positive ideas. How about that? The point, I've numbered this as point 13. I don't know if I've actually made them that distinct to you, but
This is what I've seen a lot of people do in a variety of leadership positions, but it seems to me that Deborah Gist is particularly adept at it to me. And to put it simply, what you want to do is pick a movable metric that matters and get the public invested in moving that metric. And I can't remember what they are right now, but every time I see Dr. Gist, she reminds me that we've got these 5 things that we're concentrating on, and here's where you are. High school graduation rate is, I think, is one.
I was going to say, one of those is definitely high school.
High school graduation rate, and she can tell me, all the good that's been accomplished on that. And when pressed on it, she also knows the places where that's not gone so well. And when she's in our editorial board meeting, going through these 5 metrics, it sounds like she knows how she's got a vision for what she wants the district to be. She knows how to get it there, and she's done a good job of making me want to get the public involved in doing. Now, later on, I might think about it and think, those 5 metrics are not necessarily the ones that actually are the critical vital signs for the school district, or perhaps just, but I think instead of number 2, I go over and look at this one over here. It doesn't really matter. She's chosen things that she thinks the public can get invested in and that she can actually make a difference about, and that's that's a platform. It's an agenda, and it's also a means of judging your work. So choose things that you really can make a difference in. Mayor Bynum, when he was running against Mayor Martha, some of the things he said seemed a little bit nebulous. In a debate format, someone asked him, well, what metric can we use to judge you? How will we know if you've been a successful mayor or not? And he knew the answer. I mean, he said, if the population of Tulsa increases in the time that I'm a mayor, that means we've made this a place that people want to move to. And I think the other one he gave us was average income. If we raise the income of the people who live here, then we've done what we're trying to do. And those are both measurable numbers, right? That's not hard to get. The federal government puts out those statistics every year. This is an agenda you should choose for yourself on day 1, and I think it's the part of that message you make in that first 15 minutes with your media captains when you're getting to know them. That's why I remember Keith repeatedly telling me that we're going to put a qualified teacher in every classroom qualified leader in every school building. That's what he had rallied the community to do, and it was how we were going to measure whether or not he had succeeded or not. This other one is kind of tangential to this doesn't flow in the logic of the things I said, but you need to find ways, especially if you're in a top leadership position, to make yourself an unmistakable part of the community. That is, every time people look around, they need to say, "Oh, there's Wayne Green," and it's that you're integral to it. So, what does that mean? That means, that's why the school superintendent should always be at Chamber of Commerce luncheons. Not because they're particularly interested in hearing what the 3rd District Congressman has to say, but because in the 15 minutes prior to the speech by the 3rd District Congressman, the superintendent has walked around the room and shook the hands of every industrialist, every manufacturer, every chamber board member, every publisher, all the movers and shakers who were in the room. When he was our superintendent, John Thompson, there was a lot to be said for and against John Thompson, but he had a brilliant idea, which Dewey Martlet just flat stole to his credit when he was mayor, which is he went to a different church every Sunday. And before he got there, he would, the week before, he'd call the pastor of the church and say, "I'm come to church, to your church Sunday, and if you're comfortable, at some point, if you would wanted to introduce me, and let me just stand up and speak for a minute, just to introduce myself and tell you what I'm about as the school superintendent or the mayor, then I'd be glad to do it." How much goodwill can you get for yourself just by a simple act like that? I'm almost done. Yes. The final thing is, the way I phrased it here is, wake up every morning committed to improving, this is about schools, wake up every morning committed to improving the learning of the children in your district, and never make a secret about it. Have a 15-word way of saying what your mission is, and that mission statement should be in simple 5-letter words that don't involve anything that you learned in graduate school. This is, we're here to help the boys and girls in Tulsa read and think better. That's an awkward way of putting it. But you want to, you need to have a simple, direct, honest, forthright statement about what your mission is, and you need to repeat it every time you're in front of the public, every time you're talking to a newspaper editor, every time every time you're in a public position, and if you're in that awkward position where someone, the camera's rolling and asks you a question about somebody's Buckley Amendment rights, and you can't answer it, you just honestly cannot answer the question, repeat the mission. Okay, so that's my thoughts about public relations in school. I'm glad to talk to you about anything. In the past, people seem to want to talk about the legislature. When I come to this class, I have been following the legislature for 20 years professionally, so if that's of interest to you, any way I can help you, I'd be glad to here to answer your questions. Thoughts?
What do you attribute our budget crisis in the state of Oklahoma to?
We don't have enough money. We don't tax ourselves sufficiently to pay for the things that we have to do. And we never have. You know, when I was in third grade, my third grade teacher had a bumper sticker on a car, her Pinto, that said Oklahoma is number 49. And then the second line said in public school funding. So that was what, 1970 something. So it doesn't matter who the governor is or whether Republicans or Democrats have been in the legislature. We've never adequately funded the core services of education, public safety, transportation, and so on. Now, in the past 12 years, we have horribly undercut that even further by reducing our income taxes and to a lesser extent reducing gross production taxes, and also making some other fiscal choices that were just stupid. And then we made some policy choices before that we're now paying for, which were involving crime and punishment, such that we went from having 30,000 people in either in incarceration or in under supervision by the Department of Corrections to 50,000, pushing 55 now. And we're not a rich enough state to, aside from the fact that that's just horribly unwise, to be incarcerating people for, in many cases, what amounts to a medical problem. We're incarcerating people for addictions. Aside from the unwiseness of that, we're just not a wealthy state to lock up that portion of our population. There's another mega trend on top of that, which is that not just true of Oklahoma, but we are an aging state, we're an aging population, which makes us a less healthy state. In my lifetime, higher education has gone from the second, number 2 funding priority in Oklahoma to the number 3 funding priority, and it's very quickly about to slip into the number 4 funding priority. But what became number 2 is the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, which is our Medicaid agency. We are a lot less healthy. As we get older, we're not as healthy. The lion's share of the money, the big chunk of the money in the Healthcare Authority is going to pay for people in nursing homes. So more and more and more of the money that we have is going to pay for long-term medical care, which means that there's less money for higher education and public schools. More and more of the money is going to pay for keeping people in prisons, and every penny we pay to keep someone in prisons is money that we don't have to pay for third-grade teachers or for anything else, for mending roads, building better bridges, allowing highway patrolmen to drive 101 miles in a day, whatever.
Why do people keep voting in legislators who are not raising the revenue?
That is one I struggle with every day. There's a couple of trends going on there. One is that a high portion of the people who do vote are voting with their personal best interest. Let me back up. Too many people don't vote. That's the first answer. An absurdly high portion of the population is not participating in the choice, and that is not a phenomenon that is evenly spread across society. The truth is that poor people don't vote in much higher numbers than middle class and wealthy people. When in 2014, Mary Fallon was reelected by a very large margin. I forget what it was, but it was a good number. However, the number of people that she had personally denied healthcare coverage to, by her refusal to accept Medicaid expansion funding, was greater than the number, than her margin of victory. So if everyone who she had refused healthcare coverage to had registered and voted, and had voted their own self-interest, she couldn't possibly win. Now, some of those people were registered and did vote, and some of them voted for her. That's, you know, that's another situation, which I struggle with. But you know, I'm not. There are 40,000 teachers in Oklahoma. I don't think 30 or 40,000 of them are voting their best interest on when they're in the ballot box dealing with legislative choices.
On the state question for 1% sales tax, do you believe that if that would have been a half a cent and it only went to K through 12, that David Warren could have got it passed?
Interesting. It lost by such a big number that I don't know.
Or what do you think caused it?
Well, the things that you're isolating, I think, were part of it. The fact that the money was, that it was sort of an impure spread of the money, that is higher education got some of it, and people certainly aren't as attached to the VOTEX system as they are to, but they wanted one thing fixed. They wanted public schools fixed, and this money was sort of shotgunned out in a broader education sense. So that didn't help. They were a victim of polling to an extent. Polling is increasingly erratic and unuseful in politics. But they polled a variety of things, raising the income tax, raising the gross production tax, doing whatever, and the numbers told them that sales tax was, for whatever reasons, the sales tax was the way to go. It was the most popular tax increase. But then I think when people got to the ballot box, some of them said, I just don't want to pay a penny more, or even a half a penny more for $1 worth of bread. Some people voted against it for doctrinaire reasons. It's a tax on the poor. It's a progressive tax. Both are true. I don't think that accounted for a big portion of the defeat. And then it is sad to say, but some people just don't perceive anymore that they have a social contract. That part of the social contract is taking care of other people. So my kids aren't in school anymore. My grandchildren are in private schools. I'm taken care of. This doesn't help me. I'm ready to pull the ladder up behind me. That's an awful thing to think about in society, but I think there's an element of that going on. It's still just puzzling. I mean, we spoke with probably 40 legislative candidates prior to that election, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives, liberals, men, women, most of them metropolitan Tulsa, but a couple of them from far afield. And one of the questions we asked all of them was, what are you hearing from your constituents? What do they want? Fix the public schools. That's every one of them. Fix the public schools. Well, that's going to cost some money. They're ready. They understand we don't have a spending problem. We have a revenue problem. Now we also have a spending problem, perhaps. So, some of them want to say we're not sure that the money's being used as efficiently as it might. We want to make sure that yada yada yada.
waste, graft, and whatever, corruption. We want to make sure that the money's being used as efficiently as possible. But we brought in a new crop of legislators who told us that, they were open to even the most conservative were saying, they were open to the concept of higher taxes. And the Democrats were saying, they'd tell you which taxes they were ready to vote for. And then we got into session, and it just happened. It was one of the most, and that's in the end, you have to conclude that is a failure of leadership. That is, and I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking legislative leadership. The people who are supposed to be marshaling the forces, just were not able to do that anymore. And I go back and forth whether or not that's a personal failing. Did the Speaker of the House not do his job? Sometimes I think he could have done his job better. Sometimes I think we've reorganized the machine such that he couldn't do his job. In 1990, I think, we approved legislative term limits. And, that was a remarkable, amazing political turning point, in history. It's the moment when the Democratic majorities in the legislature were at their all-time high, and it went straight down from there. And reminding you, the Democratic majorities in the legislature who also failed to fund that public schools adequately. So that I'm not talking about that, but politically, it's when the ascendancy of the Democratic Party in the legislature started going inevitably down, and the Republicans started going inevitably up, and it created a new, not just a new partisan mix in the legislature, it created a new kind of thinking about your time in the legislature, because it used to be, if you've been a legislator for 20 years, you could well imagine yourself to be being a legislator for another 20 years. And you probably had some aspirations in that office. You might want to be the speaker someday, or the chairman of the transportation committee, or something. And there was probably by that point in your life, you had figured out the things you needed to accomplish to get to that goal. Who you wanted to lock with, what moves you needed to make to move up the ladder. Now, there are still just as many people elected to the legislature who look in the mirror and think, I'd like to be the Speaker of the House someday, except that they know that the current Speaker, at most, has got 6 more years in office. They're elected today. They can outweigh them. They don't have to work with Charles McCall to accomplish his agenda in the process of raising their own authority, their own clout. Time's on their side. That a lot of the mechanisms in the state legislative process that used to create what you would call party discipline just aren't there anymore. And therefore, they can't, the leadership just doesn't have the authority to marshal tough votes. But I mean, when it comes down to it, it takes someone at the top telling people, this is a hard one. This one's going to cost you some votes when you run for re-election. But we need you on this one. And when you have party discipline, when you have the mechanisms of party discipline, you can make that happen. And when you don't, you've got chaos.
Yes.
So this goes with a little bit of what you were explaining about the funding issues. If you paid attention to some of the things that that Mayor Bynum spoke about in his process of running for office, he talked about the importance of education, and that was something he wanted
Right.
to see
Right.
improved. And then I've heard other things talked about in terms of dealing with what's not being done at the state level, dealing with it at a local level.
Right.
And I don't know enough about the specifics of that to really speak on it, but in terms of what you know about us being able to, as Tulsans, fix education for Tulsans.
Right.
And perhaps set a trend
Right.
if we do it right. What do you know or think about that?
Well, I have a mechanism for doing this, and this is, I'm setting myself open to be called a moron. I'm in a room, I'm gonna say something where probably 20 other people in the room know more about this than I do. But, because I'm gonna talk about the funding formula. God help us. But in Oklahoma, I am answering your question. In Oklahoma, the funding formula has equalization built into it. And as a result of the very high-minded notion that a child in Winnetka, Oklahoma should be as valued as a child in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the policy implication of the way we have equalization built into the funding formula is that if Tulsa Public Schools, correct me on this if I'm correct, but if Tulsa Public Schools raises $1 extra through its ad valorem taxes, if the taxpayers somehow raise their tax rate or raise their ratio or whatever, build another building, improve property, if another dollar comes in the door, they lose 99 cents in state money, in state aid money. It's a complete losing situation. There's nothing that we can do with our tax base, with our local tax base, that doesn't penalize us back to zero on the state tax base. And I think that's what the mayor's found out when he started looking at how can we, I mean, we've got to come up with a way to acknowledge the need for equalization in the funding formula without making it a penalty for local patrons, Tulsa taxpayers, to do something about the funding problems that are unique and local. Arkansas has a different way of acknowledging the same problems that I haven't found. I've not heard an adequate argument against. In Arkansas, the legislature determines what adequate state funding is, and they get to that point, and the first, I don't know what, let's say 30 mils of local taxes are brought into the funding formula, are under consideration in distribution of state aid. But the local taxpayers have the ability to add villages for operational villages over and above that baseline level without being penalized for it over on the state aid side. And guess what? In Polk County, they've done that. And in, I think Polk County is the one that's got Little Rock in it. But anyway, they've done that in Little Rock and they've done that in Fayetteville. I think they've done it in Hot Springs. The three urban centers of Arkansas have decided we're going to tax ourselves a little bit heavier so that we can pay our teachers a little bit better. And right now in Oklahoma, other than capital needs, other than bond issues, you could never do that.
That's exactly right, and you're right, the mayor is very education oriented, and what he found out, and that's why you'll see it's kind of a leak reference in the media whenever you read about that. They say, well, we're working on that. He says that, Deborah says that. And that's what they mean, is that they started out looking to see, because we have a mayor who's very willing to help with local funding, but it's offset. And so when they talk about taking a look at it, they're talking about trying to fix it in the legislature. What we were always faced with, if we wanted to increase millage, and we made a run at that when I was head of the School Boards Association, was the rural folks are dramatically opposed to that. And for such a long time, the chairmanships, particularly in the House of Representatives, were controlled by rural legislators. I think we had the votes at one time, whenever I was head of the School Board Association, to get that changed, but we were absolutely stymied by chairs and their view toward that. I think a lot of it due to the work of Wayne Green and the Tulsa World, people really are starting to say, well, maybe we do have a revenue problem. And so I think that increasingly we may see some movement in some areas to raise revenue.
I have a question. I was actually reading a Tulsa World article 3 or 4 days ago, I think, and it was talking about the medical marijuana question coming up in the next session, next November, I think.
Mhm.
And so I was just skimming through it, and it's my understanding that if it passes, 7% tax will be
I
on
think
on
that's
that.
right.
And 25% of that tax will go towards education.
Right.
Do you ever see that happening in our state?
I don't think it would pass. If it did, I don't think it would raise that much money.
Yeah.
I mean, an issue that I'm constantly battling in letters to the editor is, why do they say, or people who write letters who say, why do the teachers say they need more money? We fixed this problem when we passed the lottery.
The lottery.
We fixed this problem when we allowed horse racing. We fixed this problem when we passed liquor by the drink. And people go all the way back to, prohibition on this. And the truth is, some of those things were grossly, especially the lottery, were grossly overpromised. The amount of revenue that they were going to produce was exaggerated in the interest of getting people to vote for horse racing or the lottery or liquor by the drink, all of which had more valid arguments in their favor than the amount of money that they were going to produce through taxation. None of those things have ever produced as much money as we were told that they were going to. And now, sometimes genuinely, more typically just out of cynicism, people claim that they've been duped. Well, I only voted for liquor by the drink because it was going to solve. It was going once and forever. We're going to solve the public school funding problem by allowing people to buy martinis in Oklahoma. That's not even a rational argument, but people certainly aren't afraid to make it. The way to fund public schools, corrections, highway building, the core public services of state government, the way to pay for those things is through fair general broad taxation. The best example would be the income tax, because income tax is also progressive. So people who earn more pay at a higher level. Anything else is a gimmick, and like most gimmicks, they don't work, or they don't work for long. We funded Oklahoma government with a variety of accounting gimmicks for 20 years, 30 years. You know, we call a tax a fee and make sure that it only applies to about 15% of the population. And that's, it's irrational and it's unfair. The way to pay for government philosophically and just economically and just out of fairness is for everybody to pay in a proportionate fashion, which is also the way you keep the tax rates relatively low. If you have a broad tax base, no one has to pay as much. Other thoughts?
How big of a revenue failure are we gonna have this coming year?
We have a built-in $400 million value. We start with that because that's the amount of one-time money, what we call one-time money. I won't explain that to you. That's built into the $7 billion appropriations. Now, if the sad truth is that the ability of our core taxes to produce revenue is on the wrong trajectory. The sales tax in particular is sliding as retail sales go to the internet, and we have 5 fewer Sears stores in Oklahoma, and how many fewer J.C. Penney's and Macy's and whatever. There's just the sales tax just isn't producing the money that it used to. So easily that $400 million could go much higher. And then there's also the pending, the sort of Damocles hanging over our head is the fact that the legislature passed who knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars within their budget under constitutionally dubious revenue measures. So we created this $1.50 a pack cigarette fee, which looks a lot like, very, very, very much like a cigarette tax that was passed within the last 5 days of the legislature without the sufficient 3/4 majority, isn't the input and vote of the people. That smells like the sort of thing that the Supreme Court might tell them, go fish. That's going to cost you, I don't know, $300 million there. That's not a revenue hole. That's not a revenue hole for the 2018 year. That's a revenue hole in the current operating year, and that's you got to have a special session at that point and try to figure out how to fix that. Especially since that cigarette tax, the money was specifically appropriated to health, mental health, and Department of Human Services. It wasn't used in sort of broad funding of state government, so that the hit to DHS would be so monumental that they'd have to, what Ed Lake would call unthinkable budget cuts would be necessary. Some of the other things that were used in a more general funding fashion, like they recreated the excise tax on car sales as a sales tax, and took it from 3-point-something% to 4.5%. So in essence, what they did was they raised the sales tax on car sales by 1-point-something%. And I forget how many hundreds of millions of dollars that's supposed to produce. Again, they did it with simple majorities and within the last 5 days of the legislative session. The car dealers are certainly going to challenge that one. Well, actually, Gary Richardson is challenging that one in court. That could create a monumental hole in the budget that would be felt particularly by education, because 32% of all the appropriated dollars that the legislature spends goes to public schools.
Okay, we kept going here for an hour and a half, and I told him, an hour to an hour and a half. He upheld his end of the deal. He spoke for 1 hour. let me tell you, I can give you the whole chapter on communications and have you memorize the damn thing, but 1 hour with one computer. And his points, which I wrote down again, as if I didn't already know them, is more than we can do with any other chapter. And of course, you can ask him questions. I mean, there are questions I would like to ask him about the gubernatorial election and others. I'm going to close, however, with one question that I think is really pertinent. I want Wayne to answer this. I'm going to preface it by saying that if you really want to know what's going on in the community of Tulsa, then read the opinion page every Sunday. Wayne has heard me tell this story so many times, but when I get my Tulsa World out of the driveway, and I know my World Carrier by name, that's how important the Tulsa World is to me. We started taking it somewhere around 1972. My wife and I did. So if anybody has been reading the World more than that, power to you. That's how long I've been reading it. I take my Tulsa World. I have this ritual that I go through, and I get the front page out, and then I put the Metro, and I put the sports page, and then the other stuff kind of, and I finish with the funnies, and then the comics, and then I take the opinion page out, and I put it right on top, and I go get a cup of coffee. I do this every single Sunday, and I go get a cup of coffee, and I go sit down, and before I do anything else, I read the opinion page. Wayne knows this is true. Not only have I told him, but he occasionally gets some text messages.
Yeah, 7 o'clock in the morning.
From me about, what I'm reading in the opinion page. Now, having said that, I strongly advise you to do that. Read the letters to the editor, read what is in there, but I think we would be in far worse shape if we did not have the opinion page of the Tulsa World, and you're talking to the executive editor. So here's my question. I personally feel a debt of gratitude that you have taken the position that you have, and I think it's a big influencer in what's going on. So my question is this: how do you decide what you're going to write? Do you run that by your editorial board on that one page of the strictly Tulsa World editorial section where you have the opinion? You have yours on Sunday morning. Of course, you got Mike Jones starting on the front page. How do you make the decision to do that? Is that decided with the editorial board? Do you have, of course, you're at the top of the food chain, but how do you decide what you're going to do?
Well, we have an 8-person editorial board. The members are listed at the top of the editorial page every day, including the publisher, myself, the executive editor, managing editor, and 4 others, who are all news professionals, people out of our newsroom. We meet every Monday and determine what editorial positions we want to take over the course of that week. Now, the publisher is technically the chairman of that board, but he doesn't participate. His work schedule doesn't allow him to participate the rest of the time. So, in fact, I'm typically the convener of the meeting, and I set the agenda. So I say, I'm the one who says, well, here's 7 topics that I've seen in the newspaper recently that I think we ought to consider. What do you think about this one? And our standards are that we want to maintain consistency with things that we've said in the past. We want to take positions that reflect our readership thinking, but also can give some leadership to the community. And also, we want to take positions. This is probably more important than those other 2 things that can help the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma and the United States to a certain extent grow and prosper and be stronger. We sort of staked out that we want to be the education paper. We want to be the pro-education paper. And we want to be the paper that says that advocates for adequate funding of core state government services, even if that means tax increases. We meet every Monday morning. We go through my list of ideas. We make our choices on what our positions will be by consensus. The truth is, if there's radical disagreement on topics, and given these sort of boundaries that I just described, there usually isn't. We have both, we have a diversity of Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, men, women, young, old, within as diverse as you can be within an 8-person board. But given the sort of general boundaries of what we're trying to do as a newspaper, we very quickly typically come to consensus on what position we want to take on things. Occasionally, we will not be able to come to consensus, we just don't go there. But we'll write about something else that day. And then, after we've sort of gone through my list of potential topics, the floor is open if anyone has any ideas. And usually 2 or 3 things will get thrown out. Ideas will be thrown out. We'll kick those around, come up with some ideas, and then I am the ultimate manager. So I'm the one who says, let's do this one on Monday. Let's do this one on Tuesday. I'm going to write this one. Mike Jones should write this one on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I'll write this one. This one's important, so we're going to move it to Sunday. And Mike, why don't you write that one? So and then I'm also the one who, on Thursday says, that one we were going to write on Saturday is now more important. Moving the pieces around. All of those are within my portfolio as an editorial page editor. Now then, in our Sunday section, we also have signed pieces by every week by me, and a signed piece by Mike Jones. And then every day of the week, almost every day of the week, we have a signed piece by the third member of our editorial staff, Bruce Plant, the cartoonist, which is literally signed. It has his signature at the bottom. Signed pieces don't reflect the newspaper's policy, the editorial policy. They reflect the thinkings of the signed author. That's also true of syndicated pieces. George Will's column may or may not reflect what the Tulsa World thinks on the topic. Charles Krauthammer, Pat Buchanan, Eugene Robinson, whoever, but those reflect the signed author's point of view. Now, as a matter of goodwill, Mike Jones and I have just said, we have a gentleman's agreement that we're not going to write columns under our own bylines that take openly dispute editorial policy. The truth is, we both have written editorials that we didn't believe in. That these probably more often happened in, well, I'll be straightforward. I wrote the endorsement of John McCain in 2000 and whatever that was. Didn't vote for John McCain. But I thought I wrote a pretty convincing argument for why people should vote for him. The publisher at the time wanted the newspaper to endorse John McCain. And sometimes the editorial votes are on a vote of 1-0. The owner of the newspaper does have the ultimate vote. Our current owner, Mr. Buffett in Ohio, has never shown any acknowledgement that he owns a newspaper in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and certainly has never called me to tell me how to write editorials. And I'm sure he's not called our publisher either. His standard is that he wants it to reflect the local newspaper's thinking. That's easy for us to accomplish. But sometimes we have taken editorial positions that just really aren't things that I or Mike agree with. Well, we've sort of agreed amongst ourselves that while we might write letters to the editor or syndicate columns that take different perspectives, we are not going to confuse the public by having a member of the editorial board writing a signed piece that takes a radically different position than the editorial board. That's just too, that asks the public to appreciate a nuance that's just too narrow, and certainly just would not be understood at all by some people. Happily, that's the rare exception. Yeah, and of course, the solution to that is not that you write a signed column that you disagree with, it is that you write a signed column about something else that you do. I've never written a column that didn't reflect my point of view. But there are some columns that I've chosen not to write because they were in disagreement with newspapers.
Okay. All right, listen, thanks for coming.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Take a short break and then we'll be back to ready to go. Thank you, Wayne.
Fascinating guy.
I didn't know Jimmy Butler.
I thought Jimmy lived in Florida. I really don't.
Hey everybody.